We've been talking about the double standard that the so-called media uses when reporting on violent incidences when a possible conservative is involved versus a possible leftist communist. Joining us now with his opinion on this very obvious bias is columnist Jack Hunter. Jack, what's your take on this?
You know, it's interesting, Michael, when this suspect walked into the Family Research Center and with a backpack full of Chick-fil-A sandwiches, he has a history of being a gay rights activist, and opened fired on an unarmed security guard, saying something reportedly to the effect of, "I don't like your politics." I'm not sure how he said it, but that's what the local authorities said that he said. You didn't hear as much in the media out there about crazed liberal gunmen opened fires on conservative organization. In fact, the evening that it happened, I was sitting in a local restaurant with some friends discussing, and nobody had heard of this. Now, you and I both know that if the ideologies were sort of in reverse, and this had been somebody who is on the right or considered on the right or right-wing in some respect, walking into a liberal organization or Planned Parenthood or something like that and committing a violent act, it would have been national news. You would have heard nothing from the liberal media for weeks on end about how the Tea Party and Michael Savage and talk radio and the grassroots right is responsible for this sort of thing. The hypocrisy is glaring. Probably the best thing to compare it to is how the media sort of treated the Jared Lee Loughner shooting when he shot Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords and nearly killed her and did kill 6 other people. We heard nothing but, for a good month at least, that this was the fault of Sarah Palin because Sarah Palin's PAC group had used target images over certain congressional districts, including Gabrielle Giffords. So somehow Jared Lee Loughner must be carrying out the wishes of Sarah Palin. We heard from the left that this was the Tea Party's doing, that the rhetoric was, just so ramped up and so crazy and so out there that this is what drove Jared Lee Loughner to try to attempt to murder Gabrielle Giffords. Well, lo and behold, Loughner's politics were not even discernible. I think he listed 2 of his favorite books as being The Communist Manifesto and Mein Kampf. I don't know what you do with that. But the larger story is the left was just quick to jump all over this. This is the fault of the grassroots right. This is the fault of the Tea Party. This is the fault of Sarah Palin without any logic to back it up. And there was a liberal echo chamber. People talk about the vast right-wing conspiracy. The vast left-wing conspiracy had already convicted the American right and being complicit in the shooting of Gabrielle Giffords. Now, looking at it through the lens of what happened at the Family Research Center, that seems completely absurd. Yet, the Family Research Center president, Tony Perkins, has singled out groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center for designating the Family Research Center as a hate group, and he's absolutely right to do that. But you don't see conservatives saying, well, this is the fault of the entire left. This is the fault of the entire gay rights movement that this crazy person walked into the Family Research Center and opened fire. Why? Because we are rational. We realize that crazy people are going to do crazy things. General American public political discourse is not what incites crazy people to do crazy things. Crazy people can listen to anything and go do crazy things.
Well, like what?
Well, let's use another example, Michael. Do you remember in 1995 when Timothy McVeigh blew up the building in Oklahoma City, the greatest act of domestic terrorism and national tragedy on American soil before 9/11 happened? President Bill Clinton at that time was quick to blame the grassroots conservatives, and particularly talk radio, that somehow talk radio had fueled this hate and had driven Timothy McVeigh somehow to murder these innocent people. Now, talk radio is part of our general American public discourse, the debates we have in this country. You have a left and you have a right. We've been debating things for decades and decades, and that will continue long after you and I are no longer around. The idea that somehow you or others in talk radio would incite somebody like Timothy McVeigh because you're critical of a President Clinton or today a President Obama, and you call them out on their awful policies and their bad ideas and their socialist tendencies. The idea that you can't say these things, that you're being irresponsible because you might incite somebody like Timothy McVeigh or a Jared Lee Loughner, a decade and a half later, is completely absurd. What they're basically saying is conservatives shouldn't have a viewpoint. You shouldn't even be able to speak lest some crazy person go out and do something. That's the entire point. Crazy people are always going to take ideas and think of them in crazy ways and commit heinous acts. This can happen on the left or right, a lesson that the left has learned quickly with this Family Research Center shooting. And once again, you don't hear conservatives saying this is the fault of the entire left, all liberals are to blame for this because we are rational and they are not.
Well, you talk about a classic double standard.
Well, because the left always has that double standard. A group like the Southern Poverty Law Center is very, indicative of that. They think that people who are against homosexual marriage, which is a completely legitimate viewpoint, the law in 40 states in this country, at least at this point, was the view of the President Obama until a few months ago, that marriage between a man and a woman. That is enough to designate the the Family Research Center, in the eyes of the Southern Poverty Law Center, is a hate group. I believe even people like Fox News Judge Andrew Napolitano has been targeted by the SPLC as a hate group. That gives you an idea of just how crazy they are. When you look at the left and things like this new Black Panther Party and these people saying they're going to, skin white babies or target white people, and it gets ignored, it shows you just how rampant the hypocrisy is. That's some pretty heady stuff. That's some pretty violent language. And here we are, you're hearing all about, conservatives might be going crazy in reaction to gay rights activists, whatnot. And this new Black Panther Party says this thing and it's hardly any coverage. Why? Because it doesn't fit into the left's narrative of what they want us to believe, what they want us to think about. In their minds, conservatives are awful. Under the underbelly of American life in general are these secret militias and neo-Nazis and KKK, and there's a direct line to them, to the Tea Party, and what we represent and what you talk about, Michael, that's how they think. So when people do that on the left, the new Black Panther Party and their outrageous comments, they just kind of ignore it. It doesn't exist. White people are bad, we're racist, Mitt Romney's racist, however you want to look at it. That's their mindset. But when people on the other side say things that are equally, if not more outrageous, well, that doesn't fit into our narrative as leftists, they think to themselves, and they just ignore it. It doesn't exist. It's that hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
I think an awful lot of this, too, Michael, is viewing things from an individual or individualistic perspective, as conservatives do, and a collectivist perspective, as liberals often do. When a heinous crime, a random act of violence takes place, liberals can't imagine that some individual on their own accord did something bad and must pay the price. It has to be the collective's fault. Who made them do this? Who gave them such rhetoric? Whereas conservatives, though we recognize that, actions and movements and ideologies can drive people to do certain things, we realize at the end of the day that people are responsible for their own actions. If an individual has a particular point of view and decides to target innocent people or shoot somebody in the name of that point of view, we recognize that that person's crazy. Rational people do not act that way. And I think that has a lot to do with how we cover these stories in the news, how they're viewed in our politics in general, just sort of the left's idea that everything must be collective. There must be a collective answer to this tragedy, and conservatives rightly believing that individuals are ultimately responsible for their own actions.
Jack Hunter, thanks for being with us on The Savage Nation.
Always good to be with you, Michael. And if you want to learn about this and more, I encourage your listeners to visit southernavenger.com. Y'all take care.